Peanuts, created, written, and illustrated by Charles Schulz, is perhaps the most notable entry in the entire medium of comic strips, being beloved for its mass appeal to children and adults. Starring children and a dog, featuring slapstick for the kids and pseudo-philosophical satirical commentary for the adults. It was arguably a pioneer in slice-of-life media. While Charlie Brown may be damaged but wise for a child, and Snoopy always has a subplot doing something undoggy-like, most conflicts still involve day-to-day activities, which was a new concept at the time. Prior to the comic strip's widespread syndication, it premiered in 1947 in Schultz's local press company, St. Paul Pioneer Press, under the name Lil Folks, in which many of the staple characters or their precursors would appear. Afterward, the United Feature Syndicate agreed with Schultz to widely distribute the strip. But the name Little Folks had already been taken. Little Folks, created by Tack Knight, lasting from 1930 to 1933, creating an issue of Lil Folks not being distinguishable enough, even though Little Folks was retired and had faded into obscurity at that point. So a new title had to be created, to Schultz's distaste. The name taking inspiration from a children's program debuting in 1947, The Howdy Doody Show, a Western-themed educational series featuring Buffalo Bob Smith and his marionette Howdy Doody, featuring a live child audience and Western marionette sketches. If this looks familiar, it's because Woody's Roundup from Toy Story 2 and just Sheriff Woody in general is a homage to this genre of post-World War II children's Western programs. Howdy Doody himself easily being the face of the obscure and dead genre. One of the segments in the later episodes of the show was called The Peanut Gallery, featuring live interviews from some of the children in the live studio audience. The children are referred to as Peanuts. Without Schultz favoring, this element would be borrowed for the retitling of Lil Folks. Howdy Doody has been declared as a public domain IP since 1998, since no trademarks had been filed since 1948 then. So before it was legally public domain, the UFS never faced any legal trouble. Schultz disliked the title for the rest of his life, but thankfully the names of the protagonists, Charlie Brown and Snoopy, would become synonymous with the IP in general. So if you've ever just called it Snoopy or Charlie Brown, don't feel bad because the creator didn't call it by its legal name either. Peanuts itself, widely syndicated, would premiere in 1950 to continuing success. Throughout the 50s, refining the signature look of the characters and establishing much of the secondary cast. The characters would first appear in animation in 1960 as a recurring animated segment on The Ford Show, hosted by Tennessee Ernie Ford. You know, the 16 tons, and what do you get, that guy? Similar to how The Simpsons began of shorts on a talk show. And by 1965, it had cemented its significance and began the viable potential elsewhere. It began its long line of adaptations, some of which are easier to find than others, so to prepare to see some 420p TV recordings.
A little bit like everyone, we all need reassurance that some people really do like us. But I guess Charlie Brown is mostly me. That's why he often has that dumb expression on his face. But, for example, when I've been beaten in a golf tournament or a bridge game, or maybe if I bowled a bad game on a particular night when I feel low, this is when I come home.
The first adaptation being a 1965 television special, A Charlie Brown Christmas. Notice how the franchise legal name is not in the title. Schultz himself would write the adaptation and would not use the name for the franchise recognition, when adapting the source material utilizing actual children in the casting. Having a Christmas special, the primary conflict involving Charlie Brown's dissatisfaction of the realization of the mainstream commercialism of the holiday as opposed to giving love much like Christ did on this date. Choosing this direction over any other generic holiday plot, there's, oh no, this person hates Christmas. Oh no, Christmas is ruined. Oh yay, Christmas is saved conveniently. Thanks, Santa Claus, who canonically exists in this universe. Christmas arguably becoming less of a Christian festival celebrating the birth of Christ after a point, and this Christ Mass special actually involves Christ, the lack of building a conflict.
Night, and lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them.
Something that most child-friendly specials don't do because of the presentation of a religious bias, which is far less marketable, hence to why most religious media is not mainstream. This might have actually been the first Christmas special to question authority about the mass commercialism of the holiday. And the mass commercialism may be common sense now, but this was the 60s, so that might have actually questioned some authority in households, contributing to the post-World War II postmodern idea that everything kinda sucks. Charlie Brown learning to not be upset with the lack of Christ and mass commercialism, and accepting that there's not much he can do, but he himself can still participate in the holiday in good non-capitalistic taste.
Oh well, this commercial dog is not going to ruin my Christmas.
The special was produced under a short period of 6 months, airing on December 9th, 1965, the runtime being cut down for half an hour rather than a full. The half-hour production even being over budget. I imagine there's an alternate timeline where they had an extra half hour, we would have seen the play that the special hypes up. But the simple ending of Charlie Brown learns that there's nothing he can do is actually far more satisfactory than a good or bad play. So that budget reduction actually helped the narrative. And I got licked on the lips by a hyper-bully mutt once, and for the record, it is disgusting. Director Bill Banderas believed the production was a disaster beyond necessary funding. Adapting the signature art style of the comic would be integral to any animated adaptation due to its simplicity and distinguishability. But unknowingly, adapting simple material was a benefit for its shoestring budget constraints. The animation being formatted in the same angles that the characters are confined to, bettering the illusion of a moving comic. Minimalism in both animation and actual storytelling being one of the greatest strengths of the special. The special would be sponsored by the Coca-Cola Company, the first of many Coca-Cola sponsorships, and animated promotional segments would be commissioned. Although, with subsequent reruns, the sponsorship segments would not appear, and some of which have been lost to time. This would include an alternate cut of the opening number, Christmas Time Is Here, where Snoopy launches Linus into a Coke sign. That's why they're both seen near Snoopy, but only Charlie Brown is launched. And a simple message brought to you by the conclusion hymn, Hark the Angels Sing. The soundtrack of the special itself would become renowned for having elements of both jazz and traditional choir music. The track Linus and Lucy would essentially become a franchise jingle, even if only designed for those two characters in a single scenario, but does often appear in scenes of sibling quarrels involving the title characters. The jazz pianist groups would be composed by jazz pianist group the Vince Gualdry Trio and producer Lee Medelson, who would also work as a lyricist for some of the vocal songs that weren't public domain hymns. The score itself would become a series of iconic jingles and hymn covers, and by 2012, the Library of Congress would consider the soundtrack as a part of a, quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically important piece of an American sound recording. The soundtrack definitely being one of its most crucial factors to its street cred in pop culture as one of the greatest pieces of Christmas media ever. And although that acclaim wasn't immediate, it was still a success and performed even better the next Christmas season, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Secure enough for greenlighting 2 more specials to release the next year in 1966, the first being Charlie Brown's All-Stars. Being a follow-up, much of the crew would return and would retain many structural similarities, being a TV special about playing baseball. The special would prioritize Charlie Brown's insecurities as he develops a poor reputation on the baseball team, trying to become more professional and overcome his poor reputation and allowing his friends to have more fun, fearing his presence may diminish the experience. Similar to the previous, the main event actually playing in a league is not shown. The rest of the team realizing the harmful nature of their mistreatment and the lack of maliciousness in Charlie Brown's poor performance.
Why are you looking at me like that?
They made your uniform out of my blanket!
While it is more cliche as a baseball episode, it does manage to dodge a lot of sports plot garbage. It's not like anything is actually accomplished, as the point of the special is to explore insecurities rather than drama over the course of going to the big league. For a second installment, it is definitely not as beloved or remembered as its predecessor. This one also had a Coca-Cola sponsorship removed in future airings, which only black and white recordings have surfaced of since, featuring one brief segment with an appropriate sign and an entire Coca-Cola baseball-themed commercial halfway through.
No matter whether you're a great player or just a great watcher.
Things go better with Coca-Cola. Things go better.
But premiering 5 months later, another well-recognized special would premiere, It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. While it does definitely feature more actual holiday celebration, the actual conflict of the Great Pumpkin actually adds a lot more character. There was also more work in the strip adaptational department of the adaptation, with the direct comic adaptations as well as including the Snoopy Flying Ace, which first appeared in 1965, and the Lucy Kick the Football gag from 1952. This is also where Snoopy first started to receive his absurd what the dog doing subplots. Linus believing in the Great Pumpkin, who has some similarities to Santa Claus, who wasn't a part of the Christmas special and is ridiculed for his different belief. Building a plot around the stupid myths you hear on the school bus, giving focus to Linus, this instance taking advantage of the established running gag of Sally's crush on the disinterested Linus, as well as his more childish attributes in a world where kids are a bit smarter, he included. The lack of resolution of an actual great pumpkin or some illusion that makes Linus believe it dodges a lot of the cliche crap too.
I thought little girls always believed everything that was told to them. I thought little girls were innocent and trusting. Welcome to the 20th century.
It's just charmful to see kids be kids without anything deep. Being the third, I think the team realized that there didn't need to be any commentary or analysis for a plot to still work. Given its seasonal replay value, this one is probably the second most known behind the Christmas. Once again, Coca-Cola sponsorships, as well as the now liquidated Dolly Madison Bakery in an alternate cut of the credits of Linus being upset, and a removed shot of a Coca-Cola scarecrow in the pumpkin patch. The next special, You're in Love, Charlie Brown's title may imply that it's a Valentine's special, but it might have been conceived out of that, but it came out in the summer and not 3 months after Halloween. The plot marks the animated debut of multiple characters as well, including the Anonymous, the little red-haired girl, expanding on a gag from 1961, and Peppermint Patty, the less favorable mousy blonde-haired tomboy who was introduced in 1966, not to be confused with Lucy's friend Patty. Peppermint Patty living in a different side of town, a setting that would later be altered with some adaptations, but would surprisingly stake a consistent piece of continuity for a fat minute. And the anonymous teacher character, Miss Othmar. Charlie Brown being distressed that he's not in the little red-haired girl's presence, being a complete opposite to his sister Sally when she's around Linus. Charlie Brown begins to prioritize the red-haired girl over himself and faces embarrassment throughout. The entire plot basically being a series of continuital sketches as a result of his refusal to admit affection. A subversion of the generic love interest plot focusing on Charlie Brown only from the red-haired girl remaining anonymous. A story about love rather than a love story.
Yes, ma'am? What am I doing? I don't have the slightest idea.
Another great example of incorporating stylistic decisions to dodge cliche crap. A Coca-Cola sponsorship is rumored to exist for this one, but has yet to resurface. But by 1968, Snoopy had clearly become the most marketable character, so it was only inevitable that he'd get a focus special. His focus special being He's Your Dog, Charlie Brown. So Snoopy is an epic prankster gangster, and everybody gets tired of his trolling, so he has to go back to the puppy mill where he was adopted from and disobeys the instruction, and starts living with Peppermint Patty, expanding on her reintroduction, and also marking the animated debut and one of the few talking appearances of Roy. Patty realizing why nobody likes the funny kid with the big nose.
He never says a word, just signals for service.
Snoopy forces himself to change to comply to Patty's orders because he doesn't want to be on a leash, but eventually runs away back to Charlie Brown's neighborhood, not really learning anything in the end, but just being the same stupid beagle he always was. It's the first true instance of over-relying on Snoopy's shenanigans since he's a dog and he's silly, and there's only so much you can do with being a silly dog. Once again, a Coca-Cola sponsorship is rumored to exist for this one, but we got nothing. The next being it was a short summer Charlie Brown, obviously being set over the summer. The story taking place in the past tense, Charlie Brown having a negative bias and Lucy holding a positive bias. With Lucy forcefully signing the boys up for a summer camp, the boys aren't interested because they're boys and they ain't going to no fruity-ass sleepaway camp. Boys being boys and boys being girls. Also featuring a camp counselor, which is the first of few instances in which adults or teenagers can be seen, unless you count the Beethoven bust. And even if the boys only win once, it doesn't magically make the experience good, which is a logical and funny consistency.
Camp, everyone! There's to be no discussion and no need to thank me.
I feel like I've been drafted.
Just being down to earth that summer camp sucked ass throughout being its greatest advantage. Penultimately, a Coca-Cola sponsorship is rumored to exist for this one. But given the consistent success of the specials, why not go bigger, leading to the first theatrical movie, A Boy Named Charlie Brown, releasing in 1969. And being a widely released animated feature in the late 60s is an accomplishment in of itself. By 69, there's no DreamWorks or Illumination, etc. And other cartoon characters were popular, but Disney sort of had a monopoly on mainstream animated features, since animation was more expensive and viewed as for children at a time. So all the most iconic non-Disney characters of the time weren't stars of mainstream animated features. Plenty of iconic shorts and television shows and whatnot, but not widespread theatrical movies. Like, we're just getting the first ever Looney Tunes fully animated feature in the year 2024. You know, even though these these characters are like 90-ish years old each. Probably because Disney held a monopoly for like half the 20th century. Hanna-Barbera was definitely the big dog of television animation then. But by 1969, Hanna-Barbera only had 2 theatrical animated features, Hey There, Yogi Bear and A Man Called Flintstone, both of which barely have any box office and budget information available online, so I'm going to assume they weren't big hits. So even if you were a big name in TV, you couldn't hold a candle to Disney on the movies. And allegedly, the first Peanuts movie, A Boy Named Charlie Brown, was praised as an instance of breaking the Disney monopoly, making about 12 times its budget in '69 money, and that success was deserved. The film expands on multiple pre-existing concepts, but adds way more depth. The same substance that made Charlie Brown Christmas beloved, being a journey of Charlie Brown's attempts to regain his self-confidence as we see his day-to-day activities, participating in a spelling bee that he believes is a gold ticket, and it actually being satisfactory when he acquires the status of champion. A spelling bee is a pretty CLICHECRAP concept, and like that's not even fun to watch in real life, but here it's actually investing from that niche slice of life beauty. Also referencing the source material / previous special elements like the baseball team, a Snoopy, all on a theatrical budget, adding way more pizzazz to the shot composition. The cutoff between characters being another fun stylistic decision to take advantage of a widespread aspect ratio, and the fact that it's based on a comic strip, further helping the moving comic illusion. Also, stylistic decisions like altering coloring are brief but more calm experimental segments throughout the film. Reminds me of George Dunning Stan Breakage, and that's a good thing, a true product of '69. The incorporation of paintings as backgrounds on specific instances does add a lot of depth to when Charlie Brown leaves his Midwestern hometown. Charlie Brown not winning for convenience for a happy ending, but concluding with honesty for optimism and satisfaction. From only partial victory, being better than the nothing he saw once within himself. Nobody really caring and being in denial over Charlie Brown's own expectations.
But did you notice something, Charlie Brown? What's that? The world didn't come to an end.
Representing a true change of mind. Nothing to be upset about, no grand finale, just beginning another day. The film's storytelling is not a loss of identity, a common occurrence when adapting television-designed characters. Just studying the characters and not placing them in a conceptually illogical scenario where there would be more things and events for the characters to do to find questionable. It's not trying to be epic, nobody's getting kicked in the balls. The scale is incorporated sparingly. Typically a movie that feels like an extended episode is a bad thing because, it's not movie-ish, but it's the more thought-out emotional substance that truly makes it enjoyable. Multiple original vocal songs would be produced for the film, but not excluding Vince Guaraldi's signature scores. There are 2 versions of the soundtrack release, one of which including the score, original vocal songs, original musical numbers, and dialogue tracks in a separate release of simply just the score. The Everything version is a rare collector's item due to minimum manufacturing from licensing issues at release, but those issues got resolved eventually and the holders got real stingy and reprinted only about 1,000 copies, making what became a holy grail of Peanuts merch even more shiny. The physical release of the score is not valuable. The number I before E except after C is a creative explanation of real-world functions of the English language that doesn't come off as absolutely randomly educational, but is a good random with its scheme, which would probably not be the case if it came out 40 years later, like the Pickle and Peanut theme song or whatever. It's like that, but good. The film being a hit, allowing the franchise to continue. Play It Again, Charlie Brown would be the first TV special in over a year and a half, given that the team had been busy on the theatrical movie. This one gives more focus to Schroeder of all characters. Schroeder is a recognizable character for his piano playing gags, but I don't think he's like a household name, unlike much of the cast up to this point. And Charlie Brown does in fact play once, although lots of promotional material does not feature Schroeder, taking advantage of the running gag of Lucy's interest in Schroeder, mainly his recognizable career and vacation potential. Lucy being the one who needs 5-cent theatrical help here. But it could have actually allowed development for Lucy to accept that Schroeder is disinterested and prioritize that conflict, but not much happens. It's just a series of sketches of Schroeder being disinterested, definitely inferior to You're in Love, Charlie Brown, which allowed way more than Schroeder only cares about music and not Lucy.
Ugh! I've been kissed by a girl! Ugh! I've been poisoned!
Get some iodine! Get some hot water!
There isn't even really a resolution either, acceptance or disinterest, which could have been a resolution, but the attempts just don't work out, and then it ends. It's like they made an entire special on the basis of one running gag. Ludwig van Beethoven's music being public domain is so heavily utilized throughout that he's credited as a primary artist on the soundtrack. This is also the end of the alleged Coca-Cola sponsorships. This one's also yet to resurface. A missing Coke to go with the nothing burger of a special. Probably because the team was working on the second Peanuts feature film releasing in 1972, Snoopy Come Home. Except for Vince Gualdry, this being the only Peanuts production of his lifetime that he was not involved in. Of course, after this film, he would resume his role on television. Schultz taking influence from Disney, feeling that a Disney-like tone would be appropriate for the character of Snoopy, and wanting to create a greater distinguishability between the feature films and television specials. Instead, the music was done by the Sherman Brothers, who you may know as the Mary Poppins guys, and there's still some jazz and piano to go around. This one has a more of an emphasis on original vocal songs, one of the featured vocalists being Thurl Ravenscroft, the singer of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, which inspired You're a Mean One, Mr. Piplop. The film would also mark the animated debut of Woodstock. Yes, it took us this long to get one of the most recognizable characters. Woodstock would debut in 1967, but other birds debuted as early as 1950, in the very beginning, but Snoopy and this one specific bird weren't friends yet. The plot of the film would loosely adapt a comic strip storyline from 1967. Given that Snoopy, an inaudible dog, is the protagonist, the film would have a heavier emphasis on sound effects, which are incorporated throughout, because what else is he supposed to do?
No dogs allowed.
The plot involves Snoopy unexpectedly leaving town to go visit his original owner, Lila. His motivation being unknown to his owner since he cannot speak. But he's a dog and he can't just get a lift, so shenanigans across the country ensue, mainly in places where dogs aren't permitted to walk. Snoopy eventually being conflicted as to who he should live with. The film also dedicated time to Peppermint Patty's interest in Chuck, the first true time in the animated chronology that gets a focus more than a line or two. An adult clown is also seen. Some of the stylistic decisions of the previous do return, but definitely not used as sparingly. This also marks the animated debut of Franklin, whose comic debut was in 1978, but he'd yet to speak in animation, who at the moment was controversial from the presence of diversity influenced by the assassination of MLK Jr., but that would escalate later.
Pay me $1,275, please. Schroeder, how about a beep on the nose? A what? Beep. A beep on the nose is a sign of great affection. I'd rather have the $1,275, please.
The film is sort of like an improved version of He's Your Dog, Charlie Brown, and for a What the Dog Doing movie, it could have been a lot worse, although not as good as the previous. The film was well received, but only made 20% of its $1.1 million budget back, which could be attributed to Cinema Center Films, the main production company, had already begun to cease operations, Snoopy being the final Cinema Center film. However, this failure wouldn't kill the franchise or its attempts at feature-length narratives, so back to the TV special it went, with another sort of holiday special, airing 9 days before the 1972 United States presidential election of Richard Nixon versus George McGovern. The special loosely adapting a comic storyline from 1964. Here, utilizing the typical student body president plot, this special would also introduce the Joe Cool alter ego, one of the most marketable gags. Vince Gualdry himself would sing the Joe Cool theme song, something he typically wouldn't do with his Peanuts involvement, being a vocalist. Charlie Brown is not even running as a candidate, so the special is technically true without spoiling the ending. Linus being the main candidate who only receives a positive reception because of Lucy's threats, running against an exclusive one-off character named Russell Anderson. The tragic flaw in Linus's campaign being that he believes in the Great Pumpkin, a fun joke with a logical consistency.
I decided to say a few words about the Great Pumpkin.
Linus eventually gets elected, but learns that he cannot do anything as a student body president. A funny parallel given the student government doesn't really mean shit. But the special is overall brought down by the lack of competition, conflict. Linus's rivalry barely gets any screen time. If anything, it should have been one of the main squad members, making the rest of the cast conflicted. It just could have been better. But also with the sort of holiday specials continuing, with There's No Time for Love, Charlie Brown, the main conflict expanding on Peppermint Patty's interest in Chuck, being the first instance of that being a main plot conflict.
Sir, I just heard that we have to go on a field trip. I'm scared to death of field trips.
This would also mark the animated debut of Marcy, who debuted in the comic strip 3 years earlier, and Franklin's first speaking role.
I'm going to do mine on the various kinds of metals in the earth, and how each has affected the progress of mankind. Maybe I'll do one on stomach aches.
The special also building off continuity of Peppermint Patty attending a different school and getting to see more of her day-to-day life. The comic still being produced simultaneously, the specials always borrowing recent additions and elements. Vince Gowaldry would also reprise his role as the Joe Cool song vocalist. Charlie Brown's academic performance is declining, featuring some satire of the redundancy of the American education systems.
Well, I think that the purpose of going to school is to get good grades. So then you can go on to high school, where the purpose is to study hard so you can get good grades so you can go to college. And the purpose of going to college is so you can get good grades.
You figured it was about Charlie Brown and trying to overcome his social life and school life, but not really either. Mainly due to the limited runtime of Peppermint Patty and Marcy's interactions, which sort of starts a love triangle. It's largely in focus despite an expansion of continuity. But the next special, A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, is the one I am easily the most nostalgic for whatever reason. I feel like I saw this one way more growing up. It is a holiday special, so it's got the annual replay value, and what else is there to watch on Thanksgiving? Free birds? I remember relating to the joke of the dissatisfactory meal of cereal, toast, jelly beans, popcorn, etc.
A pretzel stick? Popcorn? What blockhead cooked all this?
Because, like, you're 7 years old, what the hell do you know about food preparation? And if there was nobody to actually cook, you just have to get, like, American cheese and carrots in a bowl and shit. The joke at the end revealing that Snoopy could actually cook actual food and not giving Woodstock some turkey is a fun detail, too. Like Christmas, there is some satire of the American holiday commercialism.
I went down to buy a turkey tree, and all they have are things for Christmas.
For Christmas? Already?
And nostalgia bias aside, though, what the dog doing here is far more creative with its absurd complications that come with something as easy as setting up a table.
Just fast.
One controversy relating to the special that is apparently crime racism subject African Americans. Franklin is seen eating on his own side of the table, separated from the others, that some people have claimed is a detail to mock the outlawing of segregation or just black people in general or whatnot, which is clearly just an exploitation of a coincidence that was noticed 50 years later, that news outlets hyped up for a quick buck. Even though Franklin was added for diversity, Linus and Marcy are also seated individually in the apparent racist shots. Like, you can't possibly call Chuck racist. Man, it's almost like the newspapers lie all the time. The grandma isn't racist. He's allowed to dinner in the end. Why would a racist special have a non-racist grandma? Definitely one of the most memorable of the bunch. In 1974, we'd get another year of two specials. The first being It's a Mystery, Charlie Brown, which refers to about half the plot of the special. Woodstock's nest goes missing in a rainstorm, so it's his and Snoopy's mission to track it down. What the dog doing? Sherlock Holmes edition. Parodying familiar detective stories and plot points with a more childish approach throughout. Parodying familiar detective stories and plot points with a more childlike approach throughout.
You don't make any sense, sir.
Interacting with prominent characters, and it's obviously limited to a spoof, but the actual mystery conflict is not very investing. Maybe if the detective character could speak English, could have allowed for more comedy. A dumb detective rather than an illegible dog one. The other plot involves Sally's school project, which was just Woodstock's misplaced nest. Snoopy and Woodstock unknowingly acquiring it, then just arguing over it. Not really much of a satisfactory cracking of a case. Snoopy agreeing to help with an experiment replacement. It just does nothing subversive with the concept. But also later that year, we got It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. And that title sounds familiar. It's the holiday figure that exists in the universe, Charlie Brown.
Aren't those shoes almost out of date, Sally? That's why they're on sale. Besides, I like to be different anyway. Oh.
So on top of the Great Pumpkin, Linus also believes in the Easter Beagle.
You said the Easter Beagle was coming. Well, where is he?
I'd never seen this one before, and I figured it could potentially be a rehash of Great Pumpkin. But it's more of an expansion of Linus's mindset, so much of the time is actually dedicated to waiting for the Easter Beagle. But the Easter Beagle, Snoopy, shows up and gives out eggs that he stole from Lucy, and does what's expected. Different, but eliminates any of the childlike realism of the Great Pumpkin, a childhood myth. One of the main plot being Marcy's inability to color eggs correctly, which is just repeating the same joke. There is some light satire of the holiday commercialism, which is always a plus, but doesn't really retain any of the religious references despite also taking place over a Christian holiday. It's just too similar to its predecessor without being a direct rehash, so it's not the best or worst thing in the world.
Tastes terrible, sir.
This Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, another heartwarming holiday special starring the Peanuts Gang. When the Great Pumpkin puts a bounty on Charlie Brown's head, the rest of the gang race against each other to bump him off and collect the reward. Are you ready, Lucy?